Everybody, and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson Teaches Macbeth Act 1 Scene 2, part of the series of videos that I am doing, breaking down each and every scene from Macbeth as you get ready for your GCSE exams. Mentioning those, it's GCSE English Literature you're doing here, and this part of Paper 1, Section A. So without further ado, let's move on and have a look. So in summary, what is this scene all about? Well, you have Scotland fighting Norway in battle is the first thing you need to know there. You've got the Scottish flag and the Norwegian flag that I've put on your screens there. So this is sort of setting a massive fight that's going on, and there's a captain who brings a report to the king about Macbeth and Banquo's brave fighting leading their army. At this point, this is our first mention of Macbeth and Banquo, and also our first meeting of the king. So it's worth pointing out that the people on stage here, which I'll show you in a second, don't actually involve Macbeth and Banquo. But we also find out that the Thane of Cawdor has betrayed Scotland. You might wonder who a Thane is. So a Thane, as I put in the box there, is like a royal official, a bit like a baron. They would have been in charge of like looking after areas of the country, because a king can't be everywhere at once. So he has trusted people he puts in charge of different areas. One of those areas in Scotland is Cawdor. So the Thane of Cawdor has betrayed Scotland. He's been working with the Norwegians to try and overthrow the king. The king is really impressed with the work that Macbeth and Banquo has done, particularly of Macbeth, and he decides to reward Macbeth with the title Thane of Cawdor. The old one will be executed and the new one will be rewarded. So that's a bit of a summary of what goes on this scene. Let's move on and actually start down in a moment. But first, these are the characters who would be on the stage. Remember, what you're about to see is a script, so it's not a book, and there would have been actors wandering around playing these parts. So there you've got King Duncan. You've also got Malcolm on stage during this scene. He's the king's eldest son. There's the captain who I mentioned, so he's the one. He's a very minor character. We don't really see him again, in fact, but he is here reporting what's happened in the battle. And also on the stage with small parts are Ross and Lennox. Both of those are Thanes, a bit like Macbeth is. At the start of this scene, Macbeth is already the Thane of Glamis, but he becomes the Thane of Cawdor thanks to King Duncan rewarding him for his actions. So here we go. Act 1, Scene 2. It says a camp near Forres, a place in Scotland. There's an alarm off stage, and enter these characters who we just talked about, including, it says there, a bleeding sergeant. And I put his picture there on the screen for you. So Duncan says, "What bloody man is that?" talking about the captain. He can give us a report of the battle. And Malcolm, his son, says, "This is a sergeant, a good and hardy soldier. He fought against my captivity." So he's basically helped rescue Malcolm. "Hail, brave friend, say to the king the knowledge of the broil of the battle as it was when you left it." And here comes the bit where the captain now describes Macbeth in a moment. That's the bit in pink further down, which we will look at. But first thing he says about the battle is, it sort of really was in doubt, as there were two. It was almost like there were two swimmers who were panicking and choking each other. You couldn't tell who was going to win this battle. It was so close. So the captain almost compares it, uses that metaphor of two spent swimmers, like two tired swimmers clinging together. He talks about the merciless MacDonald there on line 11. Do have a look here how we've got like these line numbers going on here. So there's line 10. So line 11 here talks about MacDonald. He's the one they're fighting now, worthy to be a rebel, and he goes on to describe all the battle going on here and here. But then he talks about all's too weak. All of the other people here, all of them are too weak. And here comes the pink bit. This is what quote which I would absolutely have written down somewhere or definitely come back to. This establishes Macbeth as the brave character. And in fact, he uses the word brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name. He deserves to be called brave. Disdaining fortune, ignoring all the odds that were against him, with his brandished steel. Like his sword is his steel. And if you brandish something, that verb, or the adjective it is there, the adjective really makes it sound like he's swinging it around and is in absolute control. And in fact, he goes on to describe on line 20 his sword. It's smoked with bloody execution. Not literally, but it's almost sort of on fire with the battle that Macbeth is going through and how he's using it. He calls it execution rather than killing, which is an interesting choice of word on line 20. And like Valor's minion, he carved out his passage. So he goes through, carving, almost cutting through these people on the battlefield till he faced the slave. and which is ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him, didn't even talk to him till he unseamed him from the knave to the chaps. He plunges his sword into his belly button, his knave or his navel, and like runs his sword right up through his chest to his throat. And then he cuts off his head and fixed it upon our battlements. So I missed out that one there. But that was interesting. A typical punishment for traitors is to cut their heads off and to put them onto poles or spikes. And then basically put them on their gateways as a warning to other people. This is what happens to traitors. Now it's quite interesting because ultimately at the end of the play you should know Macbeth has his head cut off because of him becoming a traitor as well. So you could almost talk about this being a little bit of foreshadowing going on there. But yeah. So definitely a really useful quote there, and that comes from the captain. Remember, Macbeth isn't on stage. We are sat in the audience and we're hearing about this amazing man and what he's done. Duncan then says to this report, "Oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." Other quotes that I would have there as well, because I think they are good quotes to have, describing Macbeth again before we've even met him. So then we go on to describe the battle. A bit more from the captain in those lines there, but at the bottom here on line 35 I think it is, so he talks about how they began a fresh assault, the Norwegians. They come back. Duncan asks, well, didn't this not dismay, did this not sort of upset or scare or worry our captains, Macbeth and Banquo? Were they not afraid of this fresh assault? To which the captain replies, yeah. They were as afraid as sparrows, eagles, or the hare, the lion, by which he means they were as afraid of, like an eagle is afraid of a sparrow, or a lion is afraid of a rabbit. Basically, he's saying Macbeth and Banquo were not afraid. In fact, he says they were as cannons overcharged with double cracks, by which he means they fought like twice as hard. It was like they were cannons which were double loaded. But he also goes to say they wanted to bathe in reeking wounds, as if they wanted to bathe in their enemy's blood, is what he's saying there, which is a really gory and violent image. I mean, more so than we've seen already. We've already heard about Macbeth being very violent, but it's almost as if they wanted to bathe in reeking wounds. But then he says at the very end of his lines, "I am faint, my gashes, like his wounds, his blood that's pouring out of him, they cry for help." And Duncan basically says, "Go get him surgeons, you've been very brave." And off goes the sergeant, the captain as he's called. Then comes Ross, one of the Thanes comes in. Basically, "Talk to me, Ross, tell me, why have you come here?" Well, he basically has come to say that they have beaten the Norwegians. If I summarise everything there, he talks about the dismal conflict that's gone on. He introduces the Thane of Cawdor there in the middle as a traitor, a dismal conflict. He makes a reference to a Roman's wife, but essentially he's talked about the victory that fell upon us. Basically, they defeated the Norwegians, as it says there. And now no more shall that Thane of Cawdor deceive our bosom interest, says Duncan. So no more shall we be cheated by the Thane of Cawdor. They've caught him, and he says, "Go pronounce his present death, and with his former title greet Macbeth." So what we've gone here then, the Thane of Cawdor is going to be executed by Duncan, and Macbeth is to become the new Thane of Cawdor. Now it's interesting that you've got this little bit of rhyme going on here. Which almost mirrors the witches and what the witches were doing with their rhyme. So it's almost like this is linking to what happened with the witches. The witches have made predictions about Macbeth, and here again we've got that rhyme which almost sounds a bit like the witches. Yes, it's Duncan saying it, but the audience would have picked up on that. As with this last line as well, Duncan says, "What he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won." Lost and won. Those directly mirror what the witches said in the first scene, Act 1, Scene 1, which you could say is foreshadowing trouble ahead. So what are the key themes in this scene? Well, we've definitely got ideas of kingship and what it takes to be a good king. Duncan has taken his victory, and he's going to give something in reward to Macbeth. He's been a very good king. But also the violence. Think about those lines which are highlighted in pink for you. Those really do show the danger and violence of Macbeth. But also the theme of betrayal starts off in this scene. We see how the Thane of Cawdor, the old Thane of Cawdor, betrayed the king. And then we get Macbeth, who's going to become Thane of Cawdor. And ultimately he goes on to betray the king as well. So that theme of betrayal certainly starts off in this scene. Some quick revision questions for you to have a go at and write down your answers to this. This will mean that you are actively going back and revising the scene. Which two countries is the battle between in this scene? What did Macbeth do to an enemy in battle? Put it into your words what he did. Who has been a traitor and what will happen to him in this scene? And what does the rhyme at the end seem to mirror? So have a go at those questions. You may want to pause the video now and have a go at those. But alternatively, here's a bigger question to try and consider that you could use in this scene. How does Shakespeare present Macbeth in this scene? This scene has come up in exam before. The exam board have used it. Even though Macbeth's not in it, it's actually really useful for us to illustrate the sort of character that Macbeth is. So I've put a couple of bullet points to guide you at the bottom there.